Oh, to be vampire again, Harvey thought, to have claws and fangs and a hunger for blood upon him, like the hunger he had had that distant Halloween, the hunger he had turned from in disgust. He wouldn't turn from it now. Oh, no. He had let it swell the beast in him, so he could fly in Hood's face with his hatred razor sharp. But he wasn't a beast. He was a boy. It was the vampire king who had power, not him. And then, as he stared up at the house, he remembered something that Rictus had told him at the door. "It takes a lot of magic to conjure these shams and hoaxes," he said. "Mr. Hood's really sweating to find something you like." Maybe I don't need things to suck him dry, Harvey thought. Maybe all I need is wishes. "I want to talk to Hood," he told Rictus. "Why?" "Well, maybe there are some things I'd like. Only I want to tell him about them personally." "He's listening," Rictus said, glancing back towards the house. Harvey scanned the windows and the eaves and the porch, but there was no sign of any presence. "I don't see him," Harvey said. "Yes, you do," Rictus replied. "Is he in the house?" Harvey asked, staring through the open door. "Haven't you guessed yet?" Rictus replied. "He is the house." As he spoke, a cloud moved over the sun. The roof and the walls darkened, and the entire house seemed to swell like a monstrous fungus. It was alive, from the eaves to the foundations. Alive! "Go on," Rictus said. "Speak to him. He's listening." Harvey took a step towards the house. "Can you hear me?" he said. The front door swung a little wider, and a sighing breath from the top of the stairs blew a cloud of Jive's dust out onto the porch. "He can hear you," said Rictus. "If I stay," Harvey began. "Yes," said the house, making the words from the creaks and the rattles. "You'll give me anything I want?" "For a bright boy like you," came the reply, "anything." "You promise? On your magic?" "I promise." "I promise. Just say the word." "Well, for a start..." "Yes." "I lost my ark." "Then you must have another, my lodestar," the house said. "Bigger, better." And a board of the porch folded back as an ark 3 times the size of the first one rose into view. "I don't want wooden animals," Harvey said as he walked towards the steps. "What then?" said Hood. "Lead? Silver? Gold?" "Flesh and blood," Harvey replied. "Perfect little animals." "I like a challenge," Hood said. And as he spoke, a tiny din of bellows and roars rose from the ark, and little windows were flung open, and the doors flung wide, and 100 animals appeared, all perfect miniatures, elephants, giraffes, hyenas, aardvarks, doves. "Satisfied?" said Hood. Harvey shrugged. "It's okay, I suppose," he said. "Okay," said Hood. "It's a little miracle." "So make me another." "Another ark? Another miracle. What would you like?" Harvey turned his back on the Hood house and surveyed the lawn. The sight of Mrs. Griffin watching him with puzzlement inspired the next request. "I want flowers," he said, "everywhere, and I don't want 2 alike." "What for?" said the Hood house. "You said I could have whatever I wanted," Harvey replied. "You didn't say I had to give you reasons. If I have to do that, all the fun goes out of it." "Oh, I wouldn't want that," the Hood house said. "You must have fun at all costs." "So give me the flowers," Harvey insisted. The lawn began to tremble as though a minor earthquake were underway, and the next moment countless shoots pressed up between the blades of grass. Mrs. Griffin began to laugh with delight. "Look at them," she said. "Just look!" It was quite a show, tens of thousands of flowers bursting into bloom at the same time. Harvey could have named a few of them if he had been quizzed. Tulips, daffodils, roses. But most of them were new to him, species that had only bloomed at night in the high Himalayas or on the windswept plateaus of the Tierra del Fuego. Flowers with blooms as big as his head or as small as his thumbnail. Blooms that stank like bad meat or smelled like a breeze from heaven itself. Even though he knew it was all an illusion, he was impressed and said so. "Looks good," he told the hood house. Satisfied? It wanted to know. Was its voice a little weaker than it had been earlier? Harvey wondered. He suspected it was. He showed no sign of that suspicion, however. He simply said, "We're getting there." "Getting where?" said the hood house. "Well," Harvey said, "I guess we'll know when we arrive." A low growl of irritation came from the house, shaking the windows. One or two slates slid from the roof and smashed on the ground below. "I'm going to have to be careful," Harvey thought. "Hood's getting angry." Rictus echoed that thought. "I hope you're not playing Mr. Hood along," he warned, "because he doesn't like that kind of game." "He wants me to be happy, doesn't he?" Harvey said. "Of course." "So how about something to eat?" "The kitchen's full," said Rictus. "I don't want pies and hot dogs. I want—" He paused, ransacking his memory for delicacies he had heard about. "Roast swan and oysters with those little black eggs." "Caviar?" said Rictus. "That's it. I want caviar." "Really? It's disgusting." "I still want it," said Harvey. "And frog's legs and horseradish and pomegranates." The meals were already appearing in the hallway, plate upon steaming plate. The smells were tantalizing at first, but the more dishes Harvey added to the list, the more sickly the mix became. He rapidly began to exhaust his menu of real meals, however. So instead of giving the house easy recipes like meatballs and pizzas, he started to invent dishes. "I want lobsters cooked in lemonade and horse steaks with jelly baby sauce, and cottage pie cheese, and pepperoni soup." "Wait, wait," said Rictus. "You're going too fast." But Harvey didn't stop. "And Brussels sprout stew, and snail fudge with pig's foot clusters." "Wait," the house howled. This time Harvey stopped. In the heat of his invention, he hadn't even looked to see if Hood was supplying him with these eatables. But now he saw all the dishes he had demanded piled so high in the hallway that they were threatening to topple and float the ark on a noxious sea of sweetmeats and stews. "I know what you're doing," said the hood house. Uh-oh, Harvey thought. He's on to me. He looked up from the feast at the door to the facade and saw that his plan to drain the house of its magic was indeed working. Many of the windows were now cracked or broken. The doors were peeling and hanging from their hinges. The porch boards were twisted and blighted. "You're testing me, aren't you?" said Hood. His voice had never been melodious, but it was now uglier than ever, like the rumble of the devil's belly. "Admit it, thief," he said. Harvey took a deep breath and then said, "If I'm going to be your apprentice, I need to know how powerful you are." "Are you satisfied?" the decaying house demanded. "Almost," Harvey said. "What more do you want?" it said. What more indeed, Harvey thought. His mind was reeling with these ridiculous lists. He had little left in the way of demands. "You may have one final gift," the hood house said. "One final proof of my power. Then you must accept me as your master forever and ever. Agreed?" Harvey felt a trickle of cold sweat run down his spine. He stared at the teetering house, his mind racing. What was left to demand? "Agreed," the house boomed. "Agreed," he said. "So tell me," it went on, "what do you want?" He looked at the tiny animals around the ark and at the flowers and at the food spewing through the door. What should he demand? one final request to break Hood's back. But what? What? A gust of chilly wind came from the direction of the lake. Autumn couldn't be far off, the season of dying things. I know, he said suddenly. Tell me, the house replied. Tell me, and let's have this game over once and for all. I want your bright soul under my wing, little thief. And I want the seasons, Harvey said. All the seasons at once. At once? Yes, at once. That's nonsensical. It's what I want. Stupid. Imbecilic. It's what I want. You said I could have one more wish, and that's it. Very well, said the house. I will give it to you. And when you have it, little thief, your soul is mine. Chapter 23. The War of the Seasons. Hood didn't waste any time. He'd no sooner made his final offer to Harvey than the balmy wind grew gusty, carrying off the lamb's wool clouds that had been drifting through the summer sky. In their place came a juggernaut, a thunderhead the size of a mountain, which loomed over the house like a shadow thrown against heaven. It had more than lightning at its dark heart. It had the light rains that came at the early morning to coax forth the seeds of another spring. It had the drooping fogs of autumn and the spiraling snows that had brought so many midnight Christmases to the house. Now all three fell at once, rains, snows, and fogs, as a chilly sleet that all but covered the sun. It would have killed with cold the flowers on the slope had the wind not reached them first, tearing through the blossoms with such a vehemence that every petal and leaf was snatched up into the air. Standing between the fragrant tide and the plummeting curtain of ice and cloud, Harvey was barely able to stay upright. But he planted his feet wide apart and resisted every blast and buffet, determined not to take shelter. The spectacle might be the last he set eyes upon as a free spirit, indeed as a living spirit. He intended to enjoy it. It was a sight to behold, the battle of lights of which the planet had never seen. To his left, shafts of sunlight pierced the storm clouds in the name of summer, only to be smothered by autumn's fogs, while to his right spring coaxed its legions out of bough and earth, and saw its buds murdered by winter's frosts before they could show their colors. Attack after attack was mounted and repulsed. Reveille and retreat sounded 100 times, but no one season was able to carry the day. It was soon impossible to distinguish defeats from victories. The rallies and the feints, the diversions and encirclements, all became one confusion. Snows melted into rains as they fell, the rains were boiled into vapor, and sweated new shoots out through the rot of their brothers. And somewhere in the midst of this chaos, the power that had brought about raised its voice in a rage, demanding that it cease. "Enough!" the Hood House yelled. "Enough!" But its voice, which had once carried such terrible authority, had grown weak. Its orders went unnoticed, or if noticed, then unobeyed. The seasons raged on, throwing themselves against each other in rare abandon, and in passing tearing at the house which stood in the midst of their battlefield. The walls, which had begun to teeter as Hood's power diminished, were thrown over by the raging wind. The chimneys were racked by thunder and toppled. The lightning rods, struck so many times they melted, and fell through the slateless roof in a burning rain, setting fire to every floorboard, banister, and stick of furniture they touched. The porch, pummeled by hail, was reduced to matchwood. The staircase rocked to its foundations by the growth in the dirt around it, collapsed by a tower of cards. Squinting against the face of the storm, Harvey witnessed all of this and rejoiced. He had come to the house hoping to steal back the years that Hood had tricked from him, but he had never dared to believe he could bring the whole edifice down. Yet here it was, falling as he watched. Loud through the dins of wind and thunder were, they couldn't drown out the sound of the house as it perished and went to dust. Every nail and sill and brick seemed to shriek at once, a cry of pain that only oblivion could comfort. Harvey was denied a glimpse of Hood's last moments. A cloud of dirt rose like a veil to cover the sight, but he knew the moment his battle with the Vampire King was over, because the warring seasons suddenly turned to peace. The thunderhead softened its furies and dispersed. The winds dropped to an idling breeze. The fierce sun grew watery and veiled itself in mist. There was debris in the air, of course, petals and leaves, dust and ash, that fell like a dream rain, though their fall marked the end of a dream. "Oh, child," said Mrs. Griffin. Harvey turned to her. She was standing there just a few yards from him, gazing up at the sky. There was a little patch of blue above their heads, the first glimpse of a real sky these few acres of ground had seen since Hood had founded his empire of illusions. But it was not the patch she was watching. It was the congregation of floating lights, the same that Harvey had seen Hood feeding upon in the attic, which had been freed by the collapse of the house. They were now moving in a steady stream towards the lake. "The children's souls," she said, her voice growing thinner as she spoke the word. "Beautiful." Her body no longer solid, Harvey saw she was fading away in front of him. "Oh no," he murmured. She took her eyes off the sky and stared down at her arms and the cat she was carrying in them. It too was growing insubstantial. "Look at us," Mrs. Griffin said, with a smile upon her weary face. "It feels so wonderful. But you're disappearing." "I've lingered here too long, sweet boy," she said. There were tears glistening on her face, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "It's time to go." She kept stroking Stu Cat as they both faded from sight. "You are the brightest soul I've ever met, Harvey Swick," she said. "Keep shining, won't you?" Harvey wished he had some words to persuade her to stay a little while longer. But even if he had had such words, he knew it would have been selfish to speak them. Mrs. Griffin had another life to go to, where every soul shone. "Goodbye, child," she said. "Wherever I go, I will speak of you with love." Then her ghostly form flickered out, leaving Harvey alone in the ruins.